Nazis had conquered Poland, Norway, Denmark, Belgium, and France. Britain was the only country left to face the onslaught of Nazi Germany. With Britain fighting for its life, priority was given to building only existing types of combat aircraft. Geoffrey de Havilland's radical new wooden bomber looked condemned to be scrapped. But de Havilland was not a man to take no for an answer.
Sir Geoffrey's words are, well, they may not want it now, but they will want it.
De Havilland persuaded the Air Ministry to let him continue as long as he did not use any of the vital materials required for the war effort. Throughout the summer of 1940, as Britain fought for survival against the German Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain, de Havilland and his team worked on their wooden bomber. Finally, in December 1940, the aircraft was ready to be shown to the men from the ministry. It would be called the Mosquito. De Havilland had done the impossible. Using scraps from the British military machine, he had created the fastest aircraft in the world.
We knew it would fly. We were absolutely confident it would. And the question is how much better than the Spitfire it would be. Of course, we said it would be. And it was. 20 miles an hour faster.
The Air Ministry was so impressed with its performance that they placed an order for 150 Mosquitoes. It was an amazing contract for an untried and untested aircraft.
It's almost an impossible task. It's a wonderful thing to change from, they don't want it, and so give us more and more.
But it was de Havilland's vision of construction that answered this call and enabled the Mosquito to be built in vast numbers. A plan that was as simple in practice as it was visionary in conception. The aircraft was to be built like a model aircraft, with wood, plywood, glue and screws. Over 400 companies around Britain with woodworking craftsmen would make the various sections. The fuselage would be made in two halves before being bonded together. The wing would be assembled in one piece and then transported to the main factory for the final assembly. In all, over 6 tons of wood and nearly 50,000 brass screws were used in each aircraft. At 40 feet long and with a wingspan of 54 feet, a legend had been born. With a speed of 400 miles per hour, faster than any aircraft in the world, the Mosquito was ready to do battle. The RAF viewed these aircraft as too valuable to let just anybody fly them. Only the most experienced crews were selected. But for many of these men, powered by its 2 mighty Merlin engines, the Mosquito was unlike anything they had ever flown before.
The purr of a Merlin is something to experience, it really is. And then we taxied out and took off.
There you were, you suddenly look at the altimeter. 1 minute you're down at 1,000 feet, next minute you're up at 30,000.
She would climb at 2,500 feet a minute, and that was really going some. You had to get into a jet to fly anything faster than that. If you started to mishandle her, pushing and pulling, in no time at all you would over-control, and she would be like a mosquito. She would sting you.
In July 1941, the first Mosquitoes to go into service were delivered as photo reconnaissance units. It had taken only 22 months from the first drawings to delivery. Unarmed, bristling with up to 5 cameras, these aircraft were soon sweeping all over Europe, evading anti-aircraft guns and fighters. The Germans had nowhere to hide. Nothing was safe from the Mosquito's prying eyes.
photo reconnaissance was vital. We're talking the days before satellites, the days when human intelligence on the ground was limited. It was difficult to get back good information. Before every single Bomber Command raid over enemy targets, they had to take pictures of the targets, and in fact had to report the weather as well. So the Mosquito was an ideal aeroplane for that. In fact, you could say probably it was the best aircraft for this.
But it was as a bomber that the Mosquito came into its own. During the early part of World War II, bombing was a case of hit or miss. Aircraft flying at 16,000 feet would drop their bombs in huge numbers, trusting on flying skill, weather, and luck to hit their targets. But by mid-1942, the Mosquito bomber version was going to change all that. Relying solely on speed and height to outrun the enemy fighters, Mosquitoes could drop their bombs with pinpoint accuracy. Soon, Mosquitoes with payloads of up to 4,000 pounds, equivalent to a B-17 bomber, were an integral part of bombing missions. But to make the Mosquito even more deadly, they perfected the art of fast, low-level daylight raids.
We had to be under 50 feet to be under the radar. That's the whole point of low-level operations, so the Germans don't know you're coming. And then, of course, you have to go low over the target as possible, so that you took them hopefully by surprise.
Some daylight raids were flown at such low altitudes that Mosquitoes would often come back with strange souvenirs from their mission.
Many of Aussie pilots come back with telephone wires draped round his tail wheel. I know I'd come back with branches of trees that weren't planted in England.
Mosquito squadrons were now becoming more and more daring in their attacks, none more so than the daylight raid against the Dutch Philips radio factory in Eindhoven. Intelligence had discovered that the Germans were using the factory for research into radar countermeasures and had to be destroyed. The raid would bring yet another unusual role for the Mosquito and its pilot.
They sent for me 3 days or 4 days before the raid and said, I've got a special job I want you to do. We've got a cameraman coming up and I want you to fly with him down the Scheldt estuary, right down as far as Holland itself, and then turn round, come back, taking a film of the route, which we will all be taking to Eindhoven.
On December the 6th, 1942, 10 Mosquitoes went for their target.
We went low level down the Scheldt estuary into Holland. And then just then we were approaching a place I think called Turnhout. And at that point we had to climb up to 1,000 feet. And then we turned to port, and up came the factory and went down in a screaming dive and dropped our bombs straight into it.
Racing for home, the Mosquitoes were caught in German anti-aircraft fire, or flak. Over the North Sea, disaster struck.
The chap who decided to follow me, because he was on his first trip and he thought he'd follow an experienced pilot, and I'm afraid he caught a bit of flak because my cameraman suddenly called out, looking backwards, God, he'd gone into the sea. I turned round and went back to the sea. And there was no dinghy or anything, just a cauldron of boiling water.
Just 6 weeks later, on January the 30th, 1943, the Mosquitoes went on another audacious raid, the 10th anniversary of Hitler's coming to power. Intelligence learned that there was to be a major Nazi rally in Berlin, led by Reich propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels and Reich Marshal Hermann Goering.